The following information is recorded for my exhibition, Some Things I Know, Some Things I Only Believe, at the Kranzberg Arts Foundation, 2021. Firmly rooted in visual culture, I consume information by bouncing between sources: fact-based news, social media, scholarly journals, textbooks, broadsides, astrology, fiction, advertising, etc. This is my truth. I'm all about it, all of it. For me, these things meld seamlessly. Making art with a variety of materials is a kind of physical manifestation of that cultural consumption. I filter and visualize that information through a lens of my own narrative, both real and imagined. My art explores gender, equity, domesticity, relationships, food, anxiety, and empowerment with a dark sense of humor that I have cultivated through necessity. As an artist, I work with a variety of materials, including oil, enamel, encaustic, watercolor, ink, graphite, collage, and digital prints, to name many. The consistent practice of mixing media, ideas, and formal approaches is innate and familiar to me. The act of combining materials became rooted in the art world's vernacular in the second half of the 20th century, and I, like many artists, build and make meaning through the proximity of formal and conceptual elements within a work of art. That meaning is significant to me on a couple of levels. Foremost is the desire to create an aesthetically pleasing composition through those formal elements of color, line, and form. However, they need to tell a story, whether evident or not. That's equally important. The underlying meaning within my work is my way of speaking the truth that I live in. This is called Eat Your Fear. The process I used to create this piece, as well as some others in this show, involves making a collage with a limited number of elements. I scan and print the image, then finish it with handwork in a variety of media. Eat Your Fear is a digital print with fabric and paper collaged on top. In addition, it includes oil and acrylic paint and a portion of a plastic tape measure. Both the torn paper and the expressive mark making of the paint is used to heighten the viewer's awareness of the physical layers and relate to the metaphorical layers that make up our own personal histories. The title is pretty straightforward in that we have to cope with fear on a regular basis, at some times more than others. Swallowing our fear gives us the ability to overcome obstacles and turn anxiety or fear into action. The text in the image, "Eat Here," refers to that one might see in a diner or roadside sign and led me to the title of the piece. From "Eat Here" to "Eat Your Fear" was a type of wordplay that I really enjoy. It plays a big part in my work. Often the titles are important to me for their meaning, whether obvious or implied, though sometimes they are nothing more than an identifier for the piece. Words within the image serve to direct the meaning and also act as a visual element in the pieces. Color, font, placement, etc. become as integral to the arrangement of the work as any other imagery. The reference to food in my work is one I revisit often. My relationship with food is complicated, an issue experienced by many and confounded by the bombardment of society's expectations placed on women especially. My protagonist in this work is okay with all that, though, and seems cheerfully resigned to these struggles. The north wall in the gallery with multicolored circles and the images and text on the exterior windows of the gallery are designed to focus on the idea of the importance of text in my imagery. I wanted the circles to be bright pops of color, eye-catching, compelling, and hopeful. The theme of the gallery season for which this exhibit was designed is knowledge. So I started thinking about the idea of knowing, of things we consider to be known, or what even is knowable. The last few years have brought forth in a most forceful way the realization that we must consider what is real, what is truth, and what is a fabricated reality. This led me to consider the differences between what we know versus what we believe. The title, some things I know, some things I only believe, became a kind of mantra, a looping of thoughts where I found comfort in the repetition. This is why each of the 3-inch dots on the wall include the title. I envisioned them falling downward toward the ground, falling in a melancholy yet cheery presentation. The title is repeated along the glass windows, which alternates with symbols on a 2-foot circular background. I chose symbols that would represent for me things I could say with some confidence that I know, and what I would consider more a belief. I designed the backgrounds of these images to relate to my work by incorporating a floral background in subdued 2-tone color schemes. As I worked, the line between knowing and believing continued to shift. These concepts are fluid. What makes a belief true or fact? When is a fact simply someone else's belief in something? Who decides these things? Knowledge is important to our functioning as a society. Belief is how we deal with life. That's one way of thinking about it, I suppose. It works for me. After I had designed the window symbols, I wanted to create them as individual works of art to be shown inside the gallery. There are 6 by 6-inch paintings, one that corresponds to each image outside. 3 of those are on the north wall in a grouping of pieces. See Its Power represents the crown, Know It All is the head, and Give It All is the open hands. In See Its Power, I knew I wanted to work with a crown because it clearly represents this idea and suggests a vast disparity between those who hold power and those who do not. I also thought of the revered 20th century artist Jean-Michel Basquiat, who used this symbol in much of his work. Creating my own symbol, I give a nod to his work while allowing myself permission to use a variation of it. The eyes that are painted in several of these small works began with this piece, in part because of the floral pattern in the background. The center of the flowers suggested eyeballs to me, so I enhanced that idea through paint and continued the form on the points of the crown. The 6 pieces are collage, oil, and encaustic on wood panels. I enjoy working with encaustic, though the process is completely the opposite of most paint media. With encaustic, you have to think each brush stroke out in advance because once you load the brush, there is scant time to apply the wax in its liquid state. With oil, the medium I was trained in, I can load the brush, then reassess before I engage the surface of a painting. I very much enjoy the tactile surface. It's a refreshing change and exciting challenge to push myself in different directions, which is why I often work in multiple materials. Worth Much More is a digital print with graphite, ink, collage, and oil paint. The work is 14 by 11 inches. Much of my work is inspired in part by popular culture, including advertising imagery, and this is a recent example of that. Themes I explore through my art are relationships, domesticity, inequity, and empowerment. This can be seen throughout my exhibition. $6.99 but worth much more was the lure in a print ad from the 1970s for a series of wigs. Yes, I thought as I saw the ad, we are worth more. What I am continually reminded of in making my work is that the issues I address now are not new. Sadly, they are also not resolved. Decades have gone by and the problems persist. Wage inequity, cultural and bodily suppression, societal standards of beauty, these are issues I thought of with this piece. While the ad was, of course, referring to the worth of the wigs themselves, I couldn't help but consider the question of worth in a broader sense. What is someone's worth, economically or otherwise? How do we assign value to someone? In my work, Worth Much More, blank faces force the viewer to focus on the hairpieces and speak to the idea of feeling erased or not being seen. The piece on the west wall, coincidentally, entitled If I Don't Look, You Aren't Here, also makes note of this idea. Contrasting the illusion of distressed and layered areas of the background is a line drawing and sharp, vivid houseplants collaged onto the surface. A A band of the color bar divides the space in a way that acts purely as a formal element, connecting visually the foliage to the large number 6. This is called Little Blue Shoe. I have several children's primer books from the 1940s through the 1960s that I use as source material for specific recurring characters in my work. The piece in this exhibit, titled Sea Kiss, for example, includes a drawing I made and adapted from a similar book of 2 school children. These figures can stand in to represent a variety of ideas, such as the adult versions of themselves, in which innocence is lost. They can be fictional, autobiographical, or allegorical. This particular piece uses a collage element from one of those texts. Drops of blue watercolor paint fall onto the background, and a layer of Naples yellow and caustic paint unifies the surface. The piece has a subdued feeling for me and introduces the nostalgia some of my work addresses. Too Big is a similar work in the show that incorporates a collaged image from the same book. The blue dots in these 2 works started as a reference to the ridiculous notion that bodily fluids in television advertising are presented as a blue liquid decided on by someone I imagine to be more palatable for viewing. This choice, whether overtly intentional or not, serves to make us uncomfortable with the reality of what our bodily fluids actually look like, and has been seen by many to create a sense of shame of how our bodies, especially female bodies, work. These ideas, politicized, controversial, or hard to swallow, are not necessarily relevant to the end product of the work of art itself. This meaning in the painting was tempered by the innocence of a young girl pouring a rock out of her blue shoe, a metaphor for the aforementioned splashes of paint. Ultimately, however, the art stands alone. For my work to be successful for me, its message matters, but the way it looks is of equal importance. Color, line, form, and composition is incredibly important. Good design is necessary for a viewer to be drawn to a work enough to then consider any underlying meaning. I'm sharing more of the content of the work with the listener now to lay bare my ideas and provide more information about my art, which is an extension of myself. The challenge of me is no more or less autobiographical than any of my other images, but may feel as though it is, since the title is in the first person. I claim it as my story by including the letter D in the headpiece on the woman. This work is created with collage material on a toned wooden panel. The pills are painted in oil, and the surface is epoxy resin. On top of that resin, I have added gold enamel dots. Pills go in, and desserts flow out of the top of the woman's head in an endless cycle of consumption. Pharmaceuticals are used in multiple images in the show, and for me, represent belief as much as knowledge. Science makes medicine real, but belief is needed for efficacy. Covering the eyes of the figure in my work speaks to seeing and knowing, or not seeing. It is also a reference to a column in Glamour magazine that identified women on the street in candid shots making egregious fashion choices. A black bar across her eyes was sufficient to discourage lawsuits while only thinly veiling the subject's identity. Called Glamour Don'ts, it was often the first turn-to segment of the magazine, as readers delighted in seeing the thumbs up or down decision of the editors and, like a roadside accident, couldn't help but gawk at the unwitting shame of a woman's poor fashion choices. The materials and process here are similar in Hold On to This For Me and My Botanical Body, also on display, though the meanings of each are different. Thanks for listening.